just, you know, so even since our occupation, when we had basically a tent city, we got evicted from there. It was a pretty violent eviction with like pepper spray, billy clubs like beating us and stuff like that. That was the first time that we saw the police really freak out. And we knew they were getting pressure, but we never saw them really freak out. And our district attorney, David Soares, here in Albany County, and the judge, Tom Keefe, who we were typically seeing in city court, both had said they're not going to prosecute these offenses. It's a game changer. It's an election year for our district attorney. So, we don't know what's going on. We're being brought now in front of a different judge, Judge Carter, who's a by-the-book judge. And we're being arrested now. It seems to be very targeted arrests. They seem to be going after anybody who they is a known anarchist, anyone who they perceive as a leader in the movement. Even though we obviously don't have leaders.
Where are the arrests happening? Or how are
one of the arrests that we're going to court for tomorrow, 4 people were arrested last Wednesday when we were doing our Solidarity with Quebec March. And literally one of our people was taken from the sidewalk, thrown into the street by a police officer, then arrested for being in the street, and charged with 2 counts of disorderly conduct. He has an ACOD already on a Class A misdemeanor. So we don't know what's going to happen in terms of, like, will that misdemeanor be reopened? Because we're going in front of a judge who's, like, really by the book. Like, you don't mess up when you have an ACOD.
What's an ACOD for us?
German contemplating of dismissal. So as long as you don't do anything in that 6-month period, that disappears from your criminal record. You don't have any record of being arrested. You're fine. So it's kind of a game changer. Going to court tomorrow, we have people charged. They were charged initially with felonies, incite to riot. I can't even remember. There was like 6 or 7 charges.
And how many were marching when the arrest occurred?
Probably about 50, 60 people. So, and it was very interesting, like, who wasn't arrested. There was a ton of people in the streets standing around watching 4 people get arrested. And so...
Were they targeted, do you think?
We believe absolutely they were targeted. And we believe that the arrest that happened the week before, it was an action in Speaker Scalos' office. And there were 6 of us in the room. We knew we were going to be arrested, but we were overcharged. We were charged with criminal trespass. And this is, like, in the Capitol, where
a public building,
is supposed to go.
Publicly paid for.
So we're charged with criminal trespass. I was interrogated for 40 minutes. I had a retinal scan done without my permission, a biometric facial scan done without my permission. I asked twice to have a lawyer, was denied. I was asked to be Mirandized, I was denied. I was charged with a misdemeanor, 3rd degree criminal trespass, and that charge was not reduced. I got an ACOD, but on the misdemeanor, not on a reduced charge. So tomorrow is sort of uncharted water. We're going in with people with charges. 2 people have 2 counts of each of disorderly conduct. Then we have, and one of whom has an ACOD on a misdemeanor, and then on a previous misdemeanor. And then we have 2 people that have been overcharged with, I can't even remember their charges. I know obstruction, and incite to riot got dropped. I know one of them is one of our lawyers, and he's charged with a Class A misdemeanor. And we just don't know how it's going to go. So we're trying to get a lot of court support tomorrow. The problem with him being by the book is that our person who has an open misdemeanor on an ACOD, if he goes by the book, that can be reopened.
But that's if he gets convicted on that misdemeanor.
If he gets convicted.
Yeah, he can be charged with it. He can go to court with it. But until he gets convicted on that misdemeanor, they can't reopen the other one. You understand what I'm saying? So it's like, I arrest you right now.
If I have an ACOD, I can't have that case open unless I'm convicted of another crime?
Yeah, because
I thought it was
remember,
just if you were arrested of another crime.
You're innocent until proven guilty, supposedly.
Right.
So that's the thing is, you have a charge, but you haven't been proven guilty yet.
Right.
Now, if you cop out or you go to trial and you're proven guilty, then, now they can do whatever they want. But legally, yeah, you have to be convicted. You have to cop out to that to the other charge.
See, I didn't know that. I was afraid that just having been arrested again was enough of a cause to have the ACOD reopened.
Yeah, I mean, it's different. Like if you're on probation or on parole or something and you get arrested, yeah, that in
That's
itself,
probably what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that in itself is a violation. But even then, you know, if you go to court and you beat it, the violation is kicked out.
Okay.
So, but again, talk to your lawyer. I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
I've dealt with the lawyer before, so.
Yeah. Let's get information.
How large is the Occupy Albany?
It varies. We do one big General Assembly a week. It's not even big. It's like 20 people. It's on Saturdays. People come and go. We have about 40 working groups. And so the way Occupy Albany's generally been running is we have an indoor space that we've turned into an info shop. And as you can, there's a presentation going on. You know, people can use it for whatever they want to use it for. And then the working groups are like their own little affinity groups. We also have affinity groups. But the working groups do their projects, and at the GA they report back. They, you know, and that's how we keep in touch with what's going on with each other. And we exchange resources and ideas, and any monies that we fundraise. You know, if people need money for a project, they can request money, and you know, it's a pretty simple. I don't think anybody's ever been refused.
What about for actions? Like, any actions that you have? Do you get a lot of people to come out, or?
It varies. Like right now, we're working on minimum wage and living wage. We've gotten hundreds of people for that. We get a lot of people because we work with other groups. That's a real popular issue in New York State. You know, 80% of the public wants an increase in the minimum wage across party lines, and so that's a popular issue. And we'll get like, you know, a couple hundred people for that. On an issue where we're doing a direct action ourselves, we might get anywhere from 20 to 100, depending on what we're doing.
That's pretty
And
good.
these marches were, you know, that was only our second one. And so the first one, I think we had like 30 people. Last week, I think we had 50 people. This week, we're going to do totally legal. We're going to just do a sidewalk march. A lot of leafleting, a lot of banging on pots and pans. We're hoping because we're on the sidewalks and because of the recent arrests, that we're going to get a lot of people to come out and support and join in. And the following week, say, okay, we're going to take the streets. You know, this is what we're going to do. This is, you know, and if they tell us to get out of the street, or that, you know, we'll make a decision then about who's getting out of the street and who's staying in the street. You know, we haven't encountered as many problems as I hear some of the other occupies, but we've been evicted twice. We got evicted from the park when we had our tent city. We had another indoor space. We had one woman on the block who complained about zoning because it was a residential area and said we weren't residential, and we got evicted from there.
What was the place, or whose place?
It was an apartment building. They rented out a storefront. It used to be an art gallery. Before that, it was a hair salon. But it is in a residential area. It had never been enforced before that building had to be residential until we moved in. We were there for like a month and a half. They evicted us because this woman wrote a letter and got to City Hall and was like, if you don't put pressure on the landlord to evict them, I will bring this to the media that you're letting Occupy Albany do things that you wouldn't let anyone else do.
Well, thank you for giving us a heads up so we can educate the people on what's going on here. What's your name again? I'm sorry.
Jordy.
Jordy. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
And thank you for giving us some information. I think
you're
the people will
welcome.
be happy to know, especially since they perceive Albany as working with the Occupy and being so great. At least that's what I had heard.
That's how it had been. It just turned on a dime.
That one judge.
So we just started this every Wednesday night in celebration of what's happening in Montreal in solidarity, because we have issues with tuition here in Albany and throughout the state, but we're the headquarters of SUNY, so it's an appropriate place. And so we went out there, and we were so sweet and mellow and marching and having this good time, and it never even occurred to us that there was going to be any issue, because there hasn't been. And out of nowhere, these cops come over and they talk to our lead facilitator, the sweetest guy. He's the one who peacemakes them on us, okay? And, you know, he's the sweetest, mellowest, sweetest guy. He goes, oh yeah, talk to our lawyer. They go over, they come back, they bust him. Then they go after our 3 most high profile...
What did they arrest him for?
Inciting a riot. They tried to make that stick. It's like incredible. And then they went after 3, and it turns out he's a lawyer, okay, which I didn't even know. And then they bust 3 other people who are, you know, white guy activists who are high profile, done a lot of work, and are at every meeting. And so when they know who's who on a pretty intimate level, it really, you know, makes us wonder. But in any case, everybody was let out of jail and charges were dropped because, like I say, the DA source is on our side. But they were roughed up, and there was one person who had to go to the ER with a wrist injury. And so this week we're bringing out as many people as we can, and our commitment is to really march every Wednesday night, because if the police need to be reminded not to be frightened of the right of peaceful assembly, then we need to, you know, help them with that, and so that's our intention.
We're going to join you.
Assert that.
In fact, we can roll down the streets
We were so thrilled to have reinforcements come to town. So,
I think it's crazy because we had heard these stories about how the police were working with Albany, and you were one of the places that things were great, and then to hear that. But I wonder if they want.
Well, I have to say, like, to compare it to Oakland, we've gotten off very light. And, you know, I'm aware that I used to live in Oakland, so I know that. And I have to say that the police have been forced to be restrained, but there are some among them who resent it. And the level of, like, you know, there was nothing going on except this sort of anger and picking people out.
They were picking people out.
Yeah, so it was clear, it was like, we've been waiting for this opportunity, you know? It was like, oh.
We call them the bullies.
Yeah.
New York has them, Oakland has them, Denver has them, the major cities.
Yeah,
you know,
and
Chicago was the same. Inside a riot.
Chicago, they were just beating people, letting them go. They didn't want to arrest them. They just wanted to
They were just beating people. I mean, it was. Yeah. What's your name, sorry?
I'm Grace.
Grace. Nice to meet you. From Albany. And so, thank you for giving us what's going on. I think it's important that people know.
My name is Jessica.
Jessica. So,
prior to our eviction, we'd actually had a pretty good working relationship with the APD. It's a little bit different here because we have, you know, because the park that we have been occupying, Academy Park, is actually on the Capitol, and so, you know, we have a very large state police force here. So we've had a lot of interactions with not just the APD, but we've had a lot of interactions with the state police as well, and. You know, I mean, this is no secret. The state police are typically much more respectful. You know, they're a lot more serious. They'll be a lot quicker to arrest you for something. But they're a lot more respectful. Actually, the last time I was arrested by the state police, the room that they were holding us in, they had a dry erase board up, and they had one of our bumper stickers pinned up in the corner. Which was wonderful. Yeah, so the state police have always kind of, we've maintained the same relationship with them, but the APD, there's a very clear distinction between prior to the eviction and then, you know, the night of the eviction they became aggressive, they became violent. You know, there's just unwarranted use of pepper spray. There was one officer who was mounted on a horse in the crowd, just kind of, you can see the video from it. Tim Cass was here that day, and he has a lot of really good footage of it, but you can see he just arbitrarily kind of waves. You know, our city common council member is one of the people who got pepper sprayed. You know, it was ridiculous. And so actually until the march that we had on Wednesday, we had known that they were capable of that type of aggression, but we hadn't seen it again. So this past Wednesday was our second solidarity march, you know, with the students in Quebec, and we started from the same place and took the same route that we had taken the previous week. You know, we got I would say maybe 5 or 6 blocks away from where we started, up Lark Street, which is one of the it's one of the main thoroughfares. There's a lot of you know, bars and restaurants there. That's why we chose it, because there's usually people sitting outside. And so we get a couple blocks up there, and you know, 1 or 2 beat cops on bicycles come up, and, you know, they go up, they approach our legal observers, because they, you know, they have the hats and they see them as authority figures, and tell us, you know, you have to get on the sidewalks, you can't be on the streets anymore. We've marched in the streets dozens of times, and not had any kind of a problem. So, you know, the legal observers said that they weren't in charge, and, you know, they approached Colin Donnarumma, who's also on our legal team, but that day he was, you know, just kind of coordinating and participating, and I was with him, so they approached us and said, you guys can't be on the streets, you have to move to the sidewalks, and Colin very articulately explained to them, well, you know, we're marching in solidarity, you know, the student movement in Quebec is a street movement, they're in the streets, so in solidarity we're going to march in the streets as well. And the beat cop kind of rode away. So not very long after that, an unmarked car, which, you know, oddly enough, coincidentally, was the first car that was behind us. So, I mean, you know, they had followed us from where we started. There's no other way that it just happened to be an unmarked car. They put the lights on, they come forward. Eventually there are 15 cars there. So if you go to our...
And how many marchers are there?
30.
30.
30 roughly.
50
so, I mean,
cops for 30 people.
Yeah, so it's roughly 1 cop car per 2 people. Per 2 peaceful protesters. And so we have actually really good footage of this. One of our live streamers had actually, for whatever reason that day, he was like, you know, I'm not going to live stream, I'm going to videotape in HD. Or record in HD with his phone, which doesn't go live because it goes too slow, but then you have a really good quality video afterwards.
Yeah.
So for whatever reason, that, you know, this night he was like, you know, I'm gonna get really good video this night. Maybe we can use it for something. And you can see, as soon as the cop cars come up, everybody, and the camera is actually on Dan Micah at the time, who is one of the ones who was arrested, immediately goes to the sidewalk. You know, the cop cars show up. We immediately start moving to the sidewalk. I was with Colin Donnarumma, who had mentioned earlier, and Dan Micah, and I was walking with them. We were going to the sidewalk. They were both arrested. Colin was arrested first, and I was standing right next to him. Essentially what happened is that, you know, an officer came up to him as he was walking to the sidewalk, said to him, you need to get to the sidewalk, you need to get to the sidewalk. Colin repeated, he's a lawyer himself, so, you know, he knows what his rights are, and he repeated, I'm moving to the sidewalk, I'm moving to the sidewalk. The officer grabbed him as he was complying with the order. And so I kind of reached out and grabbed his arm to help him up to the sidewalk and maybe try to hurry him a little bit. I think the officer maybe might have thought that I was trying to de-arrest him, which I absolutely was not. I mean, if you watch the video, it's clear. I'm just, you know, I have my hand under his elbow. I'm just trying to help him up. He's thrown to the ground, and he gets three officers on him, which Colin, you know, I'm not very tall. Colin's not a very big guy. I mean, if you see him, you know, he's not a type of guy you'd think, yes, 3 officers tackling him to the ground is entirely what's necessary to subdue him. It was a joke. So at that point, I'm still very close to Colin and where the other officers are, but most of the people from the march are on the opposite side of the street. So Dan, Mike, and I are there. We're maybe like 2 feet away from where Colin is. We both pull our phones out and start taking video and taking photographs. I was trying to get badge numbers. I wanted to get the badge numbers of the people who had tackled Colin. Obviously, like, I was asking for badge numbers verbally at the same time as well, but they weren't giving me any information. And in the video you can tell, this is why I think it's particularly targeted. So Colin is someone who does a lot of coordinating, he does a lot of organizing, he's a great community organizer, and he's a great facilitator, and he's great at getting things done. So at the heart of a lot of our actions, you have Colin doing a lot of hard work, a lot of coordinating, and bringing a lot of people together. So Colin was the first to go down, he was complying. Dan, Mike, and I, and this is visible on the recording that we have on YouTube, are both standing. So if Colin is this close, I'm maybe about here, and Dan Micah is back here. The officers keep approaching Dan Micah, they push him back. At one point, actually, the officer who tackled Colin throws Dan Micah back into the road, and so he gets back onto the road. And when he's arrested, you know, he gets no verbal warning. He actually didn't notice he was getting arrested until they put the cuff on, because he had his phone down like this. He's standing on the sidewalk. I think he's looking at like an image he had taken or something. And an officer just comes up, grabs his wrist, and puts a cuff on him. At this point, you know, he's quiet. He's standing on the sidewalk. He's not by any means the closest person. I'm much closer to, you know, what's going on than he is. And they arrest him. And he's another one who, you know, Colin and Dan Micah and I do a lot of the PR work. So we're people who are a bit more visible. You know, we've done like interviews and things like that, but we're a little bit more recognizable, particularly Dan Micah, You know, he's always the one who's like energizing the crowd, and like energizing the march and leading chants. And you know, we had all been arrested the previous week for occupying Dean Skelis's office. So again, there's another arrest that seems very, very targeted. The third arrest I actually didn't see myself. It was another person who, you know, does a lot of coordinating, is what I would consider like a higher profile person within Occupy Albany. But I didn't see him until he was sitting on the sidewalk in cuffs. And in the last arrest, and this is what was really interesting to me, because one, you know, if you watch the footage, I'm standing very close. They asked me to move back, I move back, and then I take a step forward. Like, I was really pushing a lot, and they weren't concerned with me. So across the street, the last person to get arrested, Tim, he's yelling, I mean, he's screaming, you know, like, this is America, you can't do this. He's very upset. You know, you just seen 3 of his friends get arrested, and it comes off as very aggressive. So I would say like 6 or so cops cross the street to him. They talk to him. I think there's some de-escalation that goes on. They don't arrest him. And like reminding you, Colin was arrested while he was complying, and Dan Micah was arrested while he was standing on the sidewalk looking at his phone. So the cops actually, some of them cross back to the street. The footage goes back to Colin or Dan Micah, one of them's doing a mic check, and then all of a sudden you hear Tim yelling again, and you cross the street, like the camera crosses the street, and the cops reapproach him, and that's when he gets arrested. So it seems pretty clear, you know, they weren't interested, they had who they were interested in arresting. They were not interested in arresting other people, unless they were made to. It's ridiculous to me that Dan Micah was arrested for standing on the sidewalk, and you know, Tim needed to be approached twice.
Yeah. Targeted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds like target. Yeah, they were trying to get the organizers.
And initially, Colin Donnarumma, who is the first one who was arrested, and you can see it very clearly. He's very compliant. He's very peaceful, and he gets thrown to the ground. They tried to charge him with inciting a riot, and that actually it got lowered before they were released. But I was one of the I went to do jail support. Myself and one other person or 2 other people, and then one of our legal representatives, and so they were communicating with the legal representative, and the first information that he got was that Colin was getting charged with inciting a riot. Dan Micah and Cookie didn't have any bail set. Tim, who was the one who had been yelling, had a $200 bail set, even though he's been arrested like a dozen times, and is currently on ACOD, like prior to this. But Colin, who has a completely clean record, and ended up getting he wasn't charged with inciting a riot. It was something lower than that. I think like some sort of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. His bail was set at $700.
Yeah. In
a group of all people who had been arrested, and 2 people who are currently on ACOD, Colin is the one who's charged, who gets a $700 bail. It doesn't make any sense to me.
The plan is to march again on Wednesday, and we're going to come with you.
Which is wonderful.
We might even just roll down the streets beside you. I mean, as long as we're moving.
Cross the street if we... but yeah, so the plan is to march again on Wednesday. I think the tactic that we're kind of trying to go for right now is to get, you know, much larger numbers this week. We have a lot of contacts with the local Solidarity Committee, local labor unions, the local Labor and Religion Coalition, and so we've reached out to a lot of those contacts, explained what's happened, and are hoping to have a much larger march. So, you know, in interest of spreading the news about you know, what's going on in Quebec, but also it's incredibly relevant to what's going on here. We're about to finish, you know, the current legislative session, which we're calling an austerity session because it very much has been. Nothing good has happened. And the SUNY system, which we have SUNY Albany here, which is, you know, a pretty large
SUNY is the universities?
Yep.
Okay.
The State Universities of New York. Okay. They just passed through a 30% budget, or a 30%
tuition hike?
Tuition hike, yeah. Absolutely. So it's incredibly relevant to what's going on here. So this week, hopefully, you know, we're going to get more people out. Montreal's historically been a pretty protestable city.
Yeah, but every night the numbers are pulling out.
They're
amazing.
Unionized. The students are unionized.
Oh.
And so the 2 big federations are both on strike right now. Like that's why this is all happening.
Okay.
So like
let me get your name too, so I can get you in here.
Of course. I didn't even realize. But
well, I was doing
an interview. So
you're okay. Yeah, you gotta get used to cameras when you're not occupied.
I know, right?
But I just want the people to know what's going on, specifically here in Albany. It's important that we all you know, get the information out there, and that's what we do, is we interview and we find out what's going on so people are aware. It's not this sleepy little town that's, oh, great with the police. No. They're targeting people, it sounds like.
Yeah, they are.
So
the video, it just makes it so perfectly obvious. Like, I just watched it for the first time, and it made it even more obvious to me that they targeted, you know, a few of us.
Is the video on YouTube? Or
Yep.
Yeah.
It is. Our handle on YouTube is Occupy Albany 99.
Occupy Albany 99. Okay.
Yep.
And your name?
Daniel Morrissey.
Daniel Morrissey. Oh, you're the one I emailed. Micah?
Yep.
Micah? You were the one that was arrested, right?
On the
that was pulled back onto the street.
Yeah, I was thrown back into the street. The district attorney apparently advised us to sit down with the police chief and, you know, get on the same page about police brutality and about, you know, what our plans are for these Wednesday night solidarity marches.
We had a good relationship with them previously, before the eviction, and then, you know, afterwards it was clear, especially through the video, you know, like you know, Tim Cass had been here, so there was like a lot of really good footage of the whole eviction. It was clear to anyone who watched any of that footage that they used excessive force, and that they, you know, were doing things that were inappropriate, like, as I mentioned earlier, you know, sitting on a horse in a crowd and just spraying into the crowd. I mean, imagining if the pepper spray had gotten into the horse's eyes, you know, it would have been terrible. But, you know, the chief, Krokoff. Which is like, it always reminds me of West Side Story. like he's like the stereotypical, like, Krokoff sounds like a really terrible, like, grumpy bad guy.
I mean, honestly, it's a little better than the last one.
And is he a terrible grumpy guy?
The last one was Chief Tuffy. It's like, are you kidding me?
So Krokoff and Tuffy. But, you know, Krokoff made a statement in support of the behavior of all of the officers. He said they all acted completely appropriately.
Oh, of course they're going to circle the wagons.
They all acted within reason. Yeah. So I can't imagine that any kind, I mean, one, you know, we shouldn't have to have a meeting with the police to exercise our rights.
They just want you to know the rules.
Yeah, sure. But two, you know, if we actually were to kind of make that compromise, nothing would come of it. I'm positive.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's the case everywhere.
They would use it as, you've been warned.
Yeah.
Right.
And then so you're better off.
Yeah,
not
absolutely.
To.
Yeah, actually, back in the park when we were having daily general assemblies, you know, we had, well, a couple of our legal working group people wanted to see if we would appoint delegates that, you know, whether or not they were, like, you know, representatives or would actually, you know, transfer power in a horizontal way. They brought a proposal about, you know, having a group of people be police liaisons, essentially, because they were getting calls all the time and they were like, I don't know what to tell you. The GA has to decide for me to tell you anything, you know. So, and they were getting calls constantly because we were right next to the state capitol and Governor Cuomo didn't want us there. Jennings didn't want us there. I was part of a blocking contingent that there were 3 of us that blocked the proposal to speak with the police, just on the grounds of not having an equal footing and on the grounds of the fact that it wouldn't be fully transparent. You know, we were talking about the possibility of bringing a video camera in so that anything that they say they would be accountable for, but they wouldn't have that, and so there was a lot of different things. So I'm definitely against, fundamentally against, the idea of validating the system and validating the agents of oppression
and asking permission to protest.
And asking permission to protest.
Which is just as a point of information. Oh, okay, never mind. That's my point of information.
Okay, there you go.
That's there we go.
So, all right. So we've been here a couple hours, and they're sitting up front.
It's a parking enforcement SUV specifically,
flashing
so they're definitely intent.
us.
They're definitely intent on. Well, actually, it looks like he's got his typical sign. Are you serious? He's gonna put no parking signs up on this block.
Oh my.
Do you want to go out and talk to him real quick?
Yeah, do you want to film?
Yeah.
Keep filming.
So the parking enforcement officer is putting up.
We have no parking signs.
What? Times, dates, and locations.
When did you get the order?
I get a piece of paper.
When did you get it?
This afternoon.
This afternoon? What time?
I don't know.
And it's just this spot right here where the RV is parked.
Yep.
So if we were to move cars and move the RV somewhere else, they're not going to declare that an emergency as well?
PJ Faranda, Faranda.
It's me.
Cool. So you said this afternoon. What time approximately did you get the order?
What's the reason for the
It's just Wednesday.
Just get times and dates.
Just get times and dates. So what time did you get the order?
I didn't get an order. I get a piece of paper. It gets faxed to me. That's it.
When did you get the fax?
I start my shift at 4, so anytime after that.
All right. So obviously, it went from one side of the RV over there to the other side of the RV right here.
I'm sure that's what they're doing. Oh my God.
And there's the space. And there's V. Occupy the roads. How's it going, Gil?
Why are you cornering these people?
But that's what the police do anyway. That's what they do. That's what they do. They wanna make it look like you're inciting it, so that they can pull out the batons and pow, pow, pow. To get above their heads to get to the, they just flunkies doing the job.
More of them than above. We all stand together and say we're not going to be violent. That's what makes it. Yeah.